Hi, I'm Dr. David Dobson. Welcome to Conversations. Today, my guest is Rebecca Pottage. Rebecca is a sustainability management PhD student at the University of Waterloo, where she also earned her master's degree in environmental studies. Today, we will discuss her master's research on how Canadians respond to information about the risk of eating meat. It's a pleasure to have you on my show, Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Rebecca, what sparked your research interest in plant-based diets?
Well, I've been vegetarian since I was in high school. I must have been in grade 12. I watched a documentary explaining the environmental impact of animal agriculture, and I just decided, you know what, I think I'm gonna stop eating meat. Learning about the relationship between meat and climate change, it just shifted something inside me. It really resonated with me. I guess it must have been the idea that I could make an individual impact, that this was something I could do for the planet. And ever since then, I've just been interested in the environmental impact of food.
Very nice. Your master's research explores how Canadians respond to information about the risk of eating meat. Could you share a bit about your research?
Sure. So, a little bit of background for you. As I mentioned, animal-based diets are not great for the environment. The world's food system is responsible for about a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, with the most significant contribution coming from animal agriculture. So, to put that into perspective, a 2022 study found that meat-based meals have 14 times higher environmental impact than vegan meals, while vegetarian meals have 3 times higher environmental impact than vegan meals. However, in general, people tend to be unaware of this relationship between meat and climate change, and teaching people about the risks of meat-based diets is actually incredibly difficult. This is because of something called the selective exposure bias. Selective exposure is the tendency to prefer attitude confirming over attitude challenging information. So, an omnivore is more likely to engage with information about the benefits of eating meat than about the risks of eating meat. And this is problematic because biased information seeking can strengthen pre-existing attitudes and beliefs and cause resistance to counter attitudinal information and also contribute to the spread of misinformation. However, information utility has been suggested as a moderator of the selective exposure bias. Information utility is the degree to which material can benefit future decision making. So, the more valuable a person perceives information to be, the more likely they are to engage with it, regardless of whether it's consistent with their pre-existing attitudes. So, in my study, I wanted to understand one, the level of knowledge that Canadians have about the impacts of meat on the environment. Two, whether Canadians engage in selective exposure to meat-related risk information. And three, if so, can information utility help override the selective exposure tendency?
Very nice. Can you share how did you conduct your research project, Rebecca?
Yeah. So I used a mixed methods approach to examine my research questions. However, the research design was mostly quantitative. I used a survey and a true experiment. 361 Canadian omnivore adults were recruited for the study through Quest Mindshare, which is a third-party recruitment platform. The sample was generally reflective of the Canadian population in terms of age, gender, living location, and education level. Participants began by completing the baseline survey, which collected information on their demographic variables, meat consumption behaviors, meat attitudes and attachments, beliefs about the risks and benefits of eating meat, and diet-related environmental beliefs. Next, participants completed the experiment, which used a pre-test, post-test control group between subjects design, bit of a mouthful. Participants were randomly assigned to either the control or experimental group, where they were provided with several statements related to the risks and benefits of meat consumption and asked to select one to learn more about. Participants in the control group were given 4 statements to choose from, none of which were framed using information utility. Participants in the experimental group were given the same 4 statements, plus an additional 2 using information utility framing. After selecting a statement, participants were provided with information about their chosen topic. And then finally, participants completed the post-experiment survey, which collected information on their reasons for statement selection, attitudes towards meat, and willingness to reduce their meat consumption, as well as whether they learned anything new. The entire process was completed using Qualtrics survey software and took participants approximately 10 to 15 minutes to complete.
Mm, great, well designed experiment and research project. Very good, Rebecca. What did you learn from your study?
My study found that the majority of participants had a poor understanding of the environmental impact of meat. Very few had a strong understanding of the subject, and about one-fourth actually believed that meat production benefits the environment.
Mm,
This gap in knowledge is likely due to more than a lack of information, as a study also found that participants engage in selective exposure to meat-related messaging. So they preferred material that aligned with their pre-existing dietary attitudes, knowledge, and beliefs. Information utility influenced selective exposure, but only for individuals already open to messaging which countered their dietary patterns. So, in other words, the framing strategy might have acted as a final push that some consumers needed to interact with that risk communication, but overall, it's unlikely to convince a heavy meat eater to engage with this information.
very good. What are the implications of this research you conducted, Rebecca?
This research has implications for those interested in strategies for communicating sustainable diets, including practitioners, not-for-profit organizations, policymakers, the media, and academics. Specifically, marketers might find it beneficial to know that information campaigns designed to reduce meat consumption are not likely to reach those unwilling to reduce the amount of meat they eat. However, information utility can be used as a tool for meatless diets for promoting meatless diets if the messages are targeted at those open to changing their dietary habits. For the academic sector, this study provides added findings in discourse on selective exposure, meatless diet communication, and environmental risk communication. Specifically, the study explored the selective exposure bias related to meat risk information, an area which only a few previous studies had investigated. And this research also examined information utility as a moderator for selective exposure to meat-related risk information, which had not been done before.
Very good. Rebecca, what is your advice for future research on communicating sustainable diets?
Overall, the results indicate that future work is needed in developing communication strategies aimed at consumers strongly attached to eating meat. Future research might explore alternative ways of framing meat-related risk communication that reduce the psychological defensiveness and the selective exposure bias. For instance, my study found that taste is a primary reason that
Mm,
Canadians eat meat. So
mm,
future research might examine whether framing meatless diets as tasty can influence selective exposure.
mm,
In addition, future research could conduct a similar study focused on the communication of vegan diets.
mm,
This study examined meat-related message framing and did not explicitly explore plant-based diet
mm,
communication strategies. So, investigating selective exposure to vegan diet information could yield different results. Previous studies have found that veganism is subject to a higher degree of social stigma than vegetarianism, so we might see
mm,
some differences there that could
mm,
be interesting.
mm. Great project research ideas for future research. Thank you for sharing this, Rebecca. What's next for you?
I am, as you said, I'm currently pursuing my PhD in sustainability management at the University of Waterloo.
Mm,
While I haven't fully decided on my research topic, I think my dissertation will shift away from meat consumption.
mm,
I think I'd like to explore consumer behavior a little more broadly, and I'm leaning towards something on green consumer segmentation.
mm. Neat, very good. Well, thank you for sharing your research, Rebecca. All the best with finishing your PhD.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.